Good morning. Good to see everybody. I had a good number were able to make it out yesterday for the memorial service for Richard Shutt. So had a good number there, also from kind of around the area. Good to see some impact that he had as well. Of course, I think we're all been seeing the emails coming in that will continue to keep Helen Derby in our prayers, as it looks like she's got a tough road of recovery out ahead of her as well after the stroke that she endured this a couple days back. So we're focusing in this morning on this concept and this idea of seeing Jesus clearly by looking at different aspects. For those who might be visiting with us, we still have a handful that'll be in the midst of traveling and traveling today as they head back to college, and we still have a few here with us, maybe that are on spring break travel in town. If you haven't been with us and looking kind of in this idea of what we're looking at, we're trying to get this better picture of Christ by, rather than looking at all of it at one time, focusing in on one aspect of what Christ brings to us. And so today we're looking at his teacher aspect of it. And so we're going to be looking at that as a trustworthy teacher. And so when we look at this, think back in over the times he's referred to as rabbi a lot of times. It wasn't a title that he held. He was never went through a certain seminary of the Jewish faith and was instilled the title rabbi. So he didn't have that, but he was clearly viewed as an excellent teacher. And so when they saw something about him, I mean, even from the time when we looked back a few weeks back and we were looking at during his childhood days, they were amazed at his understanding and his ability to teach people even from those younger years. He's certainly evolved into more than likely an even fantastic teacher to hear in the presence. We see it jumping off the pages at us, at what a great teacher he is. Of course, he was during that time, but he remains to be such a great teacher as his words are timeless. So he's that type of the teacher that always knew the right thing to say in every situation. He could reach everyone at every moment. He knew exactly what they were thinking. He could read their minds. The kind of ability that he had is the type of teacher that everyone who's in a teaching profession would long to be able to be half as good of a teacher as what Jesus is. Look at this in Matthew chapter 9. It says, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. When the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners. Notice that the question they ask him is, why is he doing this? And his reply is, here's what you actually need to know. Sometimes he would take their questions and he would turn it around into a better answer to a different question for them. You're asking the wrong question. He was such a good teacher that he could answer their questions with an answer to a different question that was an even better answer than to answer the question they had, because their questions they were laying out to him were substandard. I would say there's no such thing as a stupid question. Well, we all know is not true, right? We've all heard stupid questions before. And sometimes the Pharisees would come up with these. Why does it matter who he's eating with? That wasn't the point of it. He answers the question of, what did you come here for? Well, let me answer that one, because that's what you really need to be asking. The reason you're asking me a terrible question is because you don't understand why I'm even here. And he lays that out as an answer to them. In Matthew chapter 17, after Jesus and his disciples arrived in Capernaum, the collectors of the 2 drachma temple tax came to Peter and asked, doesn't your teacher pay the temple tax? Yes, he does, he replied. When Peter came into the house, which, by the way, it's interesting, Peter's reply there had to have been a little bit like, yeah, he does. Because as soon as he comes in, he doesn't have the same certainty he had when the question was posed to him. When Peter came into the house, Jesus was the first to speak. What do you think, Simon? He asked. From whom do the kings of the earth collect duty and taxes? From their own children or from others? From others, Peter answered. Then the children are exempt, Jesus said to him. But so that we may not cause offense, go to the lake and throw out your line. Take the first fish you catch, open his mouth, and find a 4 drachma coin. Take it and give it to them for my tax and yours. So Peter may not have known that that tax was paid after all, because he needs to have it still paid. So he says, I'm going to still pay it, but understand, I'm going to answer the question, but I'm going to teach you a little bit more about, first of all, who I am, what I have power over. I've always wondered how that coin got in there. Did he miraculously put it in there right when he said, go out and catch it, and it's out there? Was that fish swimming around with a 4 drachma coin in it from years back? We have no idea how it was. If it had always had it in there, how did Jesus know how to catch that one fish? I mean, I have not had a successful venture into fishing myself ever, which is why I no longer fish. The idea of throwing out something into the water that no fish ever seems to want, and to keep doing that over and over and over again, I can't imagine the thought of even somebody saying, go throw that line out there and catch a fish. The only time I've had luck with that is on the Missouri River, where there are so many catfish that literally if you put anything they like in there, you will catch a catfish. Like, that is the only time I've ever had successful fishing take place in my entire life. Aside from that, it was completely and utter luck if I caught something during the course of an entire day. The thought of go throw it out there, and not only will you actually catch a fish, which to me is a miracle in and of itself, but the second part, it will have our tax in its mouth. It will have that payment for it. All of this, but Jesus was answering a question that wasn't even the one that was really asked of him. He wasn't even asked the question. He hears the question asked, and he comes back in, and he explains to them the idea that I don't actually owe that temple tax, but I'm not going to cause a problem about it. I'm not here to stir up that kind of a problem. There are many other things that I will be doing that are going to cause problems. So to not cause offense, because I don't want this to get into the way of my main message, basically, we'll go ahead and do this, but go out there and catch it out of a fish's mouth, and we'll give it that way. And so it's kind of an interesting way in which he was able to do that. Jesus is just the best teacher. Think about the best teacher you've had, though. Think about, of all the ones, whether it's a Bible school teacher, whether it was a school teacher, whatever that position was held. When growing up and you have a teacher that made such a huge impact on your life, what was it about that teacher? What was it that made that particular teacher have such an impact on your life? And we could probably all come down to one, and we don't have time to go around the room and all list off exactly, but you know what you're thinking. You know what it was about that teacher that was memorable. That was one, and hopefully in a good way, memorable. We probably have some others that are memorable for other reasons. But this, specifically thinking of the good teachers that you've had, what was it that they did that helped you understand things? What was it about the connection that you made with them? How did they reach you through their teaching? You think about all of these things because we have an even better teacher out there. Jesus employed nearly every possible teaching style that is still utilized in a lot of ways to reach as many people as possible, because not everyone learns the same way. Not everyone, you can't teach one way and expect every single person to be able to connect to it in that same way. So Jesus employed a lot of different modes of teaching in order to accomplish this. He taught through the sheer authority that he had. He could say with authority. There's a certain amount of confidence that a teacher can have behind their voice, and to say something and you just take them at their word because of the confident way in which you can express it. And Jesus was able to do that many different times. One of the passages is in Mark chapter 4. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, let's go over to the other side. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke out over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." The wind died down, and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, now, again, he doesn't even address the fact that he just broke every natural law that you could come up with, instilling all of the momentum of the water, of the storm, everything that he broke physical laws to be able to do. The fact that he could even stop any of it, but the fact that he was able to stop all of it and become completely calm. Now, you think about how long it takes water to settle. It calmed completely. And then he turns to them and says, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." That was one of those wake-up calls for the disciples to realize he's different. His teachings have authority behind them. He has the power that we've never seen in anyone, and I think it's what started to draw more and more people to him. He also reached out through people through a compassionate approach that he had as well. In Mark chapter 5, it says, when Jesus again had crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, my little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and lived. So Jesus went with them. And there's a little side story that takes place in the next few verses, but we'll skip down to verse 35. And he says, while Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. Your daughter is dead, they said. Why bother the teacher anymore? Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, don't be afraid, just believe. And this is where the idea of this compassionate approach that he takes with them. He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. And he sets the stage for a more intimate setting so that he can perform this miracle in a different way. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep. And they all laughed at him. And you might think, they're just crying and wailing. All of a sudden they turn into laughter. I don't think this is like a belly laugh roar that they can't, control themselves. But it's more of just a scoffing laugh. Like, there's no way. We know what we saw. We know this. And so he goes in. And after he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, Talitha cum, which means, little girl, I say to you, get up. Immediately, the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. And as they were they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. Obviously, there's a certain amount of he even knows when is the right time to spread the message that's kind of buried within that. But I think you see a different approach. On one story, he calms a storm to make a big showing to all of them of here's the control that I have over it. Remember, there were other boats out there too. It would have instilled for them as well. All of them would have seen what had happened. Instead, on this one, it's a compassionate approach to them, but he also knows this is the right time to keep it a little quieter. And he was able to kind of, glean it down to a smaller number, just a handful in the room when this particular miracle happened. He uses parables numerous times throughout Scripture. He goes through that. One of the chapters that's filled with him is Matthew chapter 13. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? He replied, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven have been given to you, but not to them. And so he's going to have to, you could think of the parables a bit as in code, because there's two different levels of that. Yesterday, Gary brought up at the kind of in the discussion of the book of Revelation, which Richard had been, explaining these two different levels of understanding. There's what it says and there's what it means, kind of an idea. And that same kind of idea shows itself up in Jesus' parables as well. There's something that it says. And when you hear the story, you can make sense of the story that Jesus tells in these parables. And for a lot of them, that's where their understanding of it would stop. But there was always a deeper meaning attached to all of these, and he was able to reach them for those who were actually willing to hear them. Because what he was saying was often quite controversial in these parables and would get him into hot water too quickly. It would get them sent to the end of his ministry at the wrong time. And so he spoke to them, not so much in code, but in parables, which were somewhat of a multi-layered thing. So what he actually said wasn't as offensive to them as what it would have been had they really understood the meaning of what was behind it. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what they have will be taken from them. This is why I speak to them in parables. Though seeing, they do not see. Though hearing, they do not hear or understand. And this is where this idea that Jesus knew I can reach some people through parables. The ones who are able to actually take in this deeper message, these messages that were uncomfortable, that were a little bit more controversial, the ones that were going to be stepping on more toes. I'm going to speak to those in a different way because he knew it was the right way to get the point across, and they have a timeless aspect to them as well. He also uses teachable moments when just in passing, the time comes up that it's the perfect time. He seizes every single opportunity. In Matthew chapter 16, from that time on, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed, and on the third day be raised to life. Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. "Never, Lord," he said, "this shall never happen to you." Understand, too, at this point, the disciples are still, like many people in that early time, were convinced that the Messiah was going to be a militaristic leader, that was going to bring the land back to them and get these Romans out of their hair. And they were going to once again be able to be the nation they once were as God's people. That's what they had formulated in their mind to expect from the Messiah. So when Jesus says, "They're going to kill me," never, never, Lord, this shall never happen to you. We'll do whatever. And we see that as he's got sword in hand, ready to defend him to the very last day to not let this happen. Jesus turned and said to Peter, and this is not name calling, he knew exactly where this message was coming from. "Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. You do not have in mind the concerns of God, but merely human concerns." He wasn't insulting Peter by calling him a name. He was calling out where the source of that particular thought line was coming from. And he looked straight through Peter, you could almost suspect, and to Satan and says, "Get behind me. You're in my way." You know, he uses this opportunity then to continue that teaching. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." You know, he's been telling them, I'm going to have to go to the cross. I have a crucifixion out ahead of me. You too, if you want to follow me, you're going to have to follow me that way. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it. But whoever loses their life for me will find it. And we understand that as we see that taught throughout the New Testament, of this idea that we give up of our old selves so that we can live into a new body, that we can give up of our old lives and let it die through that watery grave of baptism, raised into a newness of a different way of living through him. What good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul? For the Son of Man is going to come in his Father's glory with his angels, and then he will reward each person according to what they have done. And the promise is laid out there. So he tells them this while Peter is panicking over, never let this happen. You're never going to die. You're never going to die. He's like, "Oh no, I'm going to die. And so are you." We all are going to, but we're going to be raised into a newness of life. We're going to die that way so that we give up our lives so that we can have a better life out ahead of us. "Truly I tell you, some who are standing here will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom." He goes on, and he also teaches them through object lessons as well. As we continue to see this, he's going to use things that are around him and use that as something that's tangible that they can look at and they can kind of see a story come out of this. The one that jumps out to me at most on this one is Matthew chapter 22. "Then the Pharisees went out and laid plans to trap him in his words. They sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians. 'Teacher,' they said, 'we know that you're a man of integrity,' as they send out their false puffing up of praise that they didn't believe in, because this is not what they were doing. They're seeking to trap him. 'We know that you're a man of integrity and that you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are.'" And he's sitting there having to listen to this. Remember, the man who can read their minds and read their thoughts and knows exactly their intention behind what they're saying has to sit there and listen to them lie to his face. "You're so great. You're so great. We believe everything. We know that you're right in everything you do. Now tell us, what is your opinion? Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not?" All right, now here's where the issue comes up and why they're trying to trap him. None of the Jews like to have to pay the imperial tax to Caesar. They did it because they had to do it. It would be like if somebody put us up on the spot here and said, "Tell us, what is the right thing to do? Is it right to pay the IRS or not?" Oh, well, I mean, is it right? It's God's money, right? So he says, all right, bring me a $10 bill, or whatever. But that's not what he says. He says instead, on this, Jesus, knowing their evil intent, says, you hypocrites, why are you trying to trap me? Show me the coin used for paying the tax. They brought him a denarius, and he asked them, whose image is this? And whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. That's the coin they probably would have been holding, something that looks similar to that, a stamped coin with an image of Caesar. And he says, whose inscription is on this? So give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. What an amazing answer. When you look at what his question was, we're going to trap him that there's no right answer to this question. We're going to give him all of the praise that we don't believe in, lying through our teeth as we tell him what a great guy he is, and then make him have to answer the most difficult question. Notice I didn't answer the IRS question, and I'm not going to. Right? Because we all know the right thing and what we want to the right. Give back to the U.S. government. What's the U.S. government? It's to give to God what is God's. I mean, that's the same kind of idea. We have to pay our taxes because it's the law, but we ought to be giving to God what is God's. We didn't have the same squirming in our seat a few minutes ago when we passed the tray around that we do when April 15th rolls around, right? We don't have that same, I've got to do this and I've got to give to God. No, we should do that with praise and happiness and joyfulness because of what we know that we're giving back to God, what he's given us in abundance. Or you give to a government that, like it or not, just gets your money. And they don't always give in return. But regardless of that issue, of that, there's two different things. They had the same issue in their society. They had the imperial government that would impose an imperial tax on them and live in palaces that they built all along in Rome and other provinces, these massive palaces that were paid for at the cost of everybody who was in the empire. They'd have these big armies that would go out and spend all of this money to go about and conquer more lands and take more people in so that the Roman Empire was growing. And at the same time, they got nothing out of the deal. And they hated having to pay that tax. And they knew that everyone would agree with them if that. And so if Jesus says that, we'll get him in trouble with the Romans. But if he says, pay the tax, it's the right thing to do, then who's going to follow that guy if he's just another, mouthpiece for the Roman government? So there's no right answer. There's no win. And he finds a way with an object lesson to teach them the most timeless truth, and he answered it exactly the right way. His knowledge of how to answer things just surpasses it. When they heard this, they were amazed. So they left him and went away. And we see this idea as we see all those different styles of teaching, different ways in which Jesus would teach them at different times and at different moments using different methods. Do we still let ourselves be amazed at the quality and the authority of Christ's teachings? A lot of times I think it's really easy for us to just become accustomed to these stories so that when we hear them again, it's like, oh, we heard that one. That was that was in his sermon 6 weeks ago. He's already recycling material. Like that idea is, this idea of are we really truly looking at this as new every time we hear it? Are we amazed and letting ourselves be amazed by it? Are we in awe of the perfect timing of his messages? When we hear it, think about what other things he could have said at that same time and how wrong it would have been, how poorly it would have gone for him. But instead, he always did the right thing at the right moment. He was able to amaze people, terrify them with his words, wow them with their words. Have we become calloused by the overwhelming effectiveness of his words? As his teachings are out in front of us, do we see what they really do? Have we let ourselves just forget and this is just what it is? And we just accept it and we just barrel through our daily Bible reading, next page, and don't even let it really jump off that page at us of what it really is saying. He was able to teach like nobody else has ever been able to teach in the past. No one will ever be able to teach now or into the future. He has had the most amazing impact as the world's greatest teacher. His miracles, I think, get the wow factor. No doubt about it. And his miracles are amazing. And when you look at what he did, that's where I think we're wowed by it. But his teachings should also leave us speechless and in awe if we let them. They're just as amazing. They don't have the flashiness to them. But when you look at the quality and the effectiveness, we should be in just as much awe at that. And what was read to us earlier in Romans chapter 12, understanding what lies before us, it says, you have come to Mount Zion, the city of the living God, the heavenly Jerusalem. You've come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn, whose names are written in heaven. Again, understand, these are the things that Jesus would have already had taught them. And that now that the early church teachers are continuing to, or the leaders are continuing to teach, is this idea that when you come to Christ, when you come to God through Christ, to Mount Zion, now you've come to thousands upon thousands of angels in joyful assembly, to the church of the firstborn whose names are written in heaven. You've come to God, the judge of all, to the spirits of the righteous made perfect, to Jesus, the mediator of a new covenant, and to the sprinkled blood that speaks a better word than the blood of Abel. And when you've come to this, see to it that you do not refuse him who speaks, talking about what we've learned from Christ. If they did not escape when they refused him who warned them on earth, how much less will we if we turn away from him who warns us from heaven? At that time, his voice shook the earth. But now he has promised once more, I will shake not only the earth, but also the heavens. His teachings have such authority that in this moment, in this particular passage, what we're seeing laid out for us is this idea that when God speaks, when Christ speaks to us, this idea that this teaching that is coming from him is so powerful that he's once shook the earth, next time he shakes it all. And on this, he says, the words once more indicate the removing of what can be shaken, that is the created thing, so that what cannot be shaken may remain. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, a teaching that started back under the prophecies of Daniel, and this idea that this kingdom that would never go away, that was not carved out from land masses set up by a human government, but instead it was God carving out from the rock, building up this church that could never be shaken, never be destroyed, then he says, I will come back, and everything else you see around the church will be shaken and removed, and one thing will be remaining. And that last thing remaining will be my kingdom. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and so worship God acceptably with reverence and awe, for our God is a consuming fire. He sent his Son, an amazing teacher, to awe and inspire us through his words. He sent his Son, an amazing miracle worker, to awe and inspire us and wow us by the miracles that he created. And what he did was he allowed us entrance into a kingdom that will never be shaken. And we receive that kingdom so that we can know that we will never lose our footing and our ground. When he returns again, it's a welcoming home. And it's this idea, these are the kinds of teachings that he tried to get through to them back then, and he struggled to break down their misunderstandings for them to get it. And we continue to have to grasp this. Even thousands of years later, we are still grappling and trying to come to terms with this idea that when he returns, and he will return, he brings us home, and where we are when he returns is what matters. Where are you? Are you following this teacher? Is he truly your rabbi, the one that you're listening to and following his every word, hanging at his every word, that the next command he has out for us is how we're going to take our next step, and that we're going to look at what he would have us to do, how we're going to live our lives, and that we stay committed to him so that we live in that reverence and that awe so that we can continue to follow him. If you're not in that position, maybe you haven't taken those first steps, the invitation is always open. But for those of us who already have, if you are in a point where you've let the teacher's words just become trite and no longer impactful, and you just need to rededicate yourself to the Lord's teachings, whatever your needs may be this morning, if we can pray on your behalf or we can help you on getting started on your walk with the Lord, whatever it is that you have need of this morning, you can come as we stand and sing.